The letter was sitting on the kitchen counter when I got home, and I knew, before I even picked it up, that everything was about to change. It was from the fertility clinic, my husband's results. He'd gone in 3 weeks earlier, quietly, without telling me why. I'd assumed it was a routine checkup. I was wrong about a lot of things that year. I stood there in my coat, still holding my keys, reading words that made the floor feel like it was tilting underneath me. And the worst part, the part that made me grip the edge of the counter until my knuckles went white, was that the results explained something I had been hiding from my husband for almost 11 years. Let me start at the beginning, because this story doesn't make sense if you just drop into the middle of it. I met my husband when I was 22. I was finishing my last year at U of T. He was already working downtown. Something in logistics, steady job, practical man. We met at a mutual friend's place in the annex, and honestly, I didn't think much of him at first. He was quiet, the kind of person who listens more than he talks. I was used to louder men, flashier men, men who made you feel like the center of something. He wasn't like that. He made you feel like you were being seen. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. It was nothing dramatic. He didn't rent out a restaurant or hire a photographer. We were sitting on the couch on a Sunday afternoon watching the snow come down outside his apartment in Etobicoke, and he just turned to me and said, "I think we should get married." I laughed. Then I looked at his face and realized he wasn't joking. He was holding a ring he'd had in his jacket pocket for 3 weeks, waiting, he told me later, for a moment that felt like us. That was the man I married. What I never told him, what I never told anyone, was that 3 months before that Sunday, I had kissed someone else, and then some. It had been brief, stupid, a work function in early December, too much wine, a colleague I barely knew outside of team meetings. His name doesn't matter. It ended before it started. He moved to Calgary in January, and I never heard from him again. I told myself it didn't count. I told myself it had meant nothing because it truly hadn't, and that burying it was kinder than confessing it. My husband and I hadn't been engaged yet. We weren't even officially exclusive, though we both knew we were. It existed in this terrible gray space where I could almost convince myself I hadn't done anything wrong. Almost. We got married the following October. It was a small wedding in Niagara-on-the-Lake, the kind with maybe 60 people and fairy lights strung through old trees. My husband cried a little when he saw me walking toward him. I told myself that what I'd done was behind me, that the woman walking down that aisle was the woman I was choosing to be. The first 2 years of our marriage were good, not perfect. Nothing is, but genuinely good. We bought a semi-detached in Hamilton when prices in Toronto became impossible. He commuted. I found a remote position with a firm based in Waterloo. We got a dog, a stubborn little beagle named after a hockey player I can't stand anymore. Then I got pregnant. I remember the feeling of holding that test in the bathroom of our house, seeing the two lines appear and feeling two things simultaneously, joy and terror. Because the timing was close enough to that December night that a thought entered my mind and would not leave. I didn't say anything. I told myself I was catastrophizing. The math was uncomfortable but not impossible. My husband was over the moon. He called his parents that same night. His mother, who had never been my biggest fan, was, for the first and possibly only time, genuinely warm to me. Our daughter was born in late autumn. She had my husband's coloring, his dark eyes, his thick hair, and I breathed for what felt like the first time in months. I watched him hold her in the delivery room and I thought, okay, it's over. The worry is over. She was the best thing that ever happened to both of us, and for a while, that was enough to quiet everything else. But the guilt doesn't disappear just because you stop looking at it. It migrates. It shows up in strange places, in the way I sometimes couldn't meet my husband's eyes when he talked about honesty, in the way I'd go rigid when a scene in a movie or a book involved someone keeping a secret from their partner. I'd become a very good performer of normalcy. I didn't know that was what I was doing at the time. I thought I had simply moved on. What I didn't know was that my husband had been carrying something too. He never said anything directly. That was his way. He processed things internally, turned them over slowly, didn't speak until he decided what he thought. But looking back now, I can see the moment things shifted. It was maybe 3 years into our marriage. Our daughter was 18 months old. We'd been trying for a second child, and it wasn't happening. He went to his GP first. Routine blood work, he said. Nothing to worry about. Then the GP referred him to a specialist, and he came home from that appointment quieter than usual. When I asked what they'd said, he told me they were just running some tests, that it was probably nothing. It wasn't nothing. He didn't tell me what the specialist had found. Not then, not for a long time. I didn't push, because pushing was never how things worked between us. He needed space to process, and I had learned to give it. But the temperature in our house changed after that appointment. Something subtle, but I felt it. He became more careful with me. Not cold. Exactly. Careful. Like he was holding something back. We stopped trying for a second child without ever officially deciding to stop. It just quietly ended, the way some conversations do, not with a conclusion, but with a long silence that eventually becomes the answer. Our daughter started school. We settled into a routine that looked from the outside like a happy family, and maybe we were. We were also two people carrying separate secrets in a house that had gotten very good at the appearance of peace. The letter on the counter changed that. My husband had gone back to the clinic. I don't know exactly what prompted it. Maybe he'd found a new specialist. Maybe something came up in a regular physical. But the results were detailed, and I understood enough of the language to understand what they were saying. He had a condition, had likely always had it, that made biological fatherhood essentially impossible without intervention, without significant medical help that we had never sought and never received. I stood in my kitchen for a very long time. Then I sat down on the floor, which is something I've never done before or since in a moment of distress. I just sat down right there on the tile with my coat still on and my keys next to me, and I thought about every single thing I had chosen not to say for 11 years. My husband came home to find me there. He stood in the doorway, looked at me, looked at the letter on the counter, and something passed across his face that I will never be able to fully describe. It wasn't surprise. That was what stopped me. It wasn't surprise at all. "You already knew," I said. He took off his shoes. He hung up his jacket. He sat down in the chair across from me. Not next to me, across. And he said very quietly, "I've known for about 8 years. 8 years." He said the first specialist had told him. He'd sat with it, he said. He turned it over for months. He looked at our daughter and looked at me, and he made a decision, he said, that he was never going to ask me directly, that he didn't want the answer, that she was his daughter and we were a family, and he had decided that was enough. But something had changed, he said. Something about seeing that letter this time, going back to confirm something he had spent years not confirming, had made it impossible to keep not asking. "So I'm asking," he said. "I need you to tell me the truth." I have replayed that conversation many times since then. The kitchen was very quiet. The dog was asleep in the other room. Our daughter was at school. And I told my husband the truth. All of it. For the first time in 11 years. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he asked one question. Did it mean anything to me? I told him no. I told him the truth about that too. That it had been a moment of weakness, that had never been about wanting anyone other than him. That I had been 22 and stupid, and I had spent 11 years trying to be worthy of the man I had almost not deserved to marry. He nodded slowly. "I need some time," he said, and he got up and he went to the spare room. That was a Wednesday in February. There's a specific kind of cold in Hamilton in February that gets into the bones of old houses, and that night I lay in our bed and listened to the radiator knock and thought about all the years I had spent performing the absence of a secret instead of just releasing it. The weeks that followed were the hardest of my life. He wasn't cruel. He was never cruel. That's not who he is. But he was unreachable in a way I hadn't experienced since the early years of our marriage. since the appointment he'd come home from and never fully explained. We were polite to each other. We co-parented with a kind of quiet precision. We did not talk about what had happened in the kitchen, not directly. Our daughter noticed. Kids always do, even when you think you're hiding it well. She started coming into our room at night the way she hadn't since she was small. She asked once, over dinner, if we were sad about something. My husband told her that sometimes adults go through hard patches, but that she didn't need to worry. She looked at him for a long moment. She has always been perceptive, and then she went back to her food. I made an appointment with a therapist. I'd been putting it off for years, which I understand now was its own kind of symptom. I started going every week. I started learning the difference between guilt and shame, and discovering that I had been drowning in the second one for so long, I thought it was just my personality. About 6 weeks after the kitchen conversation, my husband asked if he could come to a session with me. I said yes immediately. That first joint session was terrible in the way that necessary things often are. He said things that broke my heart not because they were cruel, but because they were true. That he had spent 8 years grieving something alone that he shouldn't have had to grieve alone. That he had talked himself out of anger so many times he wasn't sure he'd ever actually let himself feel it. That watching me carry on normally while he carried this knowledge had been quietly crushing. He hadn't been angry, not the way people expect. He'd been sad. Sad in the deep, private way that doesn't show on the surface. The therapist asked him at one point why he had never asked me directly in all those 8 years. He thought about it for a while. Then he said, because I knew that if I asked and she confirmed it, I'd have to decide. And I was afraid of what I'd decide. There is something about that kind of honesty that makes everything else feel hollow. We went back weekly for 3 months. It was the most uncomfortable, most important thing I have ever done. I learned that the version of myself who had kept this secret wasn't a monster. She was a scared 22-year-old who had made a bad choice and then made 10 more years of smaller bad choices compounding on top of it. I also learned that understanding why you did something doesn't absolve you of the responsibility of what it cost someone else. My husband learned things too. He learned that his silence had not, as he had quietly hoped, preserved us. It had preserved a version of us, a functional, surface-level version, while the real thing had been suspended somewhere unresolved. Our daughter had her 11th birthday in May. We made her a lemon cake, which she's been requesting since she was 6. My husband took the day off work. We went to Confederation Park in the afternoon and fed the ducks and watched her chase them around like she hadn't grown out of it yet. On the way home, she fell asleep in the back seat, and my husband and I sat in the parking lot of a Sobeys while she slept, neither of us quite ready to go inside yet. I don't know what happens next, he said. I know, I said. But I don't want to not try, he said. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a movie moment. It was my husband, being exactly who he has always been, a person who thinks slowly and decides carefully and means what he says. We are still in therapy, both together and separately. Things are not fixed, because that is not how this kind of thing works. There are still evenings when I can feel the distance, when he goes quiet in a way I've learned to recognize as him needing space to process rather than shutting me out. There are still moments when I catch him looking at our daughter in that particular way, not with pain, but with something careful and deliberate, like he is choosing her again. He chooses her every day. That's the part I didn't understand until recently. It's not a fact. It's not just biology or paperwork or a name on a birth certificate. He chooses her. Every single morning, he drives her to school and asks about her friends and shows up to her volleyball games and argues with her about her homework. Every day, he is her dad, not because he has to be, because he decided to be. Our daughter doesn't know. That's the conversation that waits somewhere ahead of us. When? How? Who is there for it? Our therapist has helped us think about it. We've agreed it's not something we'll keep from her forever because she is perceptive and she will ask questions someday and she deserves honest answers. But she is 11, and right now what she needs to know is that her parents love her and are staying. I don't talk about this to anyone in my daily life. Not my sister, not the friends I've had since university. not the colleagues I video call every week. This is the first time I've said it in full, all of it, in order, from the December night when I was 22 to the February afternoon on the kitchen floor. I used to think that keeping the secret was protecting something. My marriage, my family, the idea my husband had of me. What I know now is that I was mostly protecting myself. Protecting myself from having to face what I'd done and what it might cost. That's not kindness. That's cowardice dressed up as consideration. My husband is the bravest person I know, and I don't say that because of what he forgave me. I say it because of what he admitted, that he was afraid and that he stayed anyway. That he looked at the most destabilizing truth of his adult life and chose, deliberately and consciously, to not let it be the last word. I'm not sure I deserve that, but I'm spending the rest of my life trying to. There's a version of this story I used to tell myself where I was just a scared 22-year-old who made one bad choice and then did her best. And that's true, as far as it goes. But it leaves out the part where I made that choice quietly, every single day, for 11 years, every time I didn't speak, every time I let my husband look at our daughter and believe something I wasn't sure was real. The consequences of what I did didn't arrive as punishment. They arrived as weight, slowly, silently, the way a house settles. You don't notice the walls shifting until one day a door won't close the way it used to. My husband carried 8 years of private grief because I had never given him the chance to carry it with me. That's what dishonesty actually costs. Not a dramatic reckoning, just years of quiet erosion in a person who deserved better. I think a lot about what it actually takes to be a good person. Not in theory, not in the easy moments, but in the ones that cost you something. For me, being honest with my husband that February afternoon was the most genuinely moral thing I had done in over a decade, not because it made me look good. It didn't. It made me look exactly like what I was. But it was the first time in 11 years I had chosen truth over self-protection, and that choice, uncomfortable and late as it was the only thing that gave us any real ground to stand on. And my husband, I used to think what he showed was patience or maybe stubbornness. I understand now it was something harder than both of those things. He had to think clearly in the middle of his own pain, to ask himself what he actually knew versus what he feared, to decide what he valued more than the anger he had every right to feel. That kind of clarity doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from a person who has spent time understanding himself, his limits, what he can live with, and what he can't. That's not a passive thing. That's work. What I've had to build, slowly, in therapy, in the small daily choices of our marriage, is the kind of persistence that doesn't look like anything from the outside. It's not dramatic. It's showing up to a hard conversation again when you'd rather disappear. It's sitting in a room with your husband and a therapist and saying the thing you've been unable to say for years, and then coming back next week and saying the next thing. It's choosing the relationship over the comfort of not being seen clearly. Our daughter will be 12 this autumn. She still asks for lemon cake. She still doesn't know the full shape of what her parents went through, but she will someday, when she's ready, when we're ready to give her that truth with care. I don't know if I deserved the chance my husband gave us, but I know what I'm doing with it.